Okay, so I am going to present this work co-authored with Maurice Citrenti. The topic is the ethnic background, ethnic diversity in the Italian classroom. Why we have chosen this topic? The reason is simple. In the last decades, we have been exposed to a massive inflow of immigrants from a variety of countries, as we can see from this slide. There is an increasing trend in all stages of the educational system, and this has created a pressure on our school system, and we want to evaluate if there are some problems regarding not only academic competencies, numeracy, literacy, but also integration, friendship, and well-being. So we examine the consequences of the presence of students with immigration background on a variety of students' outcomes. We pose 3 research questions. The first one is if the ethnic share and socio-linguistic diversity affect subjective well-being, integration in classroom, academic competencies. The second, we want to evaluate if there is a moderating role of the socio-linguistic diversity in the link between ethnic share and students' outcome. And the last one, if there are some asymmetric effect, if the reaction to the ethnic share and diversity is different across natives and non-natives. Why we focus not only on ethnic share, but also linguistic diversity? Because we think that it's important to analyze the linguistic diversity within an ethnic group, because we know that in Italian classroom, there is a variety, there is a variation of countries, of origins of the country, and hence the language spoken at home. What is the previous evidence? So at the global level, we have contrasting findings. So we can see that there are some negative effects of share of minorities Black in United States regarding students' achievement, or as well in Norway. Another line suggests a teeny or null effect. The result came from Dutch lower secondary school and the segregating program in Boston that finds a null effect. One of the best papers that analyzed the effect of ethnic diversity in terms of language spoken at home is Maestri, that analyzed Dutch schools, and she found a positive effect. In Italy, we have, to the best of my knowledge, four papers, both find a negative effect. And Contini suggests a teeny effect, teeny effect, very negligible. In contrast, Tonello and Ballatore, with a different strategy compared to Contini, find a larger effect. The last one, Frattini and Meschi, find focuses not only focus their attention not only on ethnic stock, but also ethnic diversity, and see that the linguistic dissonance in classroom can be a key to interpret the negative effect of ethnic share on students' outcomes. Which is our contribution. So we want to take into account other critical dimensions, not only children's development, like academic competencies, but also well-being, integration, and behavior. We want jointly analyze the ethnic share and linguistic diversity. And we want to focus our attention on classroom as an educational environment in which students spend most of the time in the Italian setting compared to other countries where there are course taking patterns. So what are the theoretical arguments? So it's difficult when we approach the peer effect literature to find ex ante a specific direction of the peer effect, because the literature suggests both directions. The effect can be positive and negative. Above all, in a context where in our paper, but in general, we want to exploit a fixed characteristic like ethnic status, so that it's getting a sort of black box with underlying characteristics, and that they are difficult to completely disentangle. So the first block of theory is the all literature on peer effects, specifically the role theory and the social contagion theory, the idea that the students affect each other, or group of students influence each other. The second is the literature more present in economics, the good and bad apples of Lisa, so that suggests that the educational setting is composed by different input. The composition is a key point. The composition, the characteristic of the student are key points for the educational outcomes. The last one is more focused on the role of the perspective of the non-natives. They suggest the idea that if non-natives have mates in classroom coming from the same country or similar language spoken at home, they feel more integrated, less integrated. So there isn't a disruption behavior, there isn't miscommunication in classroom, a bad interaction that can result in negative outcomes. And also for the teacher, it's difficult to manage a classroom with different cultural, linguistic diversity. We have 4 hypotheses. So the first one, to carry on our hypothesis, we follow the path of Italian empirical evidence, so that they found all negative effect. And so we hypothesize that there is a negative effect of students with migration background on students' outcome, that there is also a negative effect of linguistic diversity, a sort of Tower of Babel, many languages spoken at home and miscommunication in classroom. Then there is the hypothesis about the moderation effect, that the effect of ethnic share is moderated by the diversity index. And then we expect to find a larger effect for student migration background than the natives when we look at the asymmetric effect. When we analyze the effect of peers, we have to deal with, and sometimes we solve some problems regarding these 3 periods, so the reflection, contextual, and correlated effect. We follow the previous literature that don't disentangle at all the effect of peers from peers characteristics, so the same strategy adopted by Contini and Anelli. We adjust for compositional effect, including school fixed effect and a vector of classroom characteristics. And then we adopt simply a sorting test within school across classroom. So we plausible identify a random sorting of the principal within schools regarding the non-natives. Which data? We use INVALSI, the 5th grade. We can rely on a large analytical sample, and we have 5 outcomes. Literacy and numeracy are the standardized tests provided by INVALSI. Well-being, friendship, and misconduct are 3 indexes based on different items provided by the student's questionnaire that ask about the well-being of the students, how many friends you have in classroom, or if you have a good or bad conduct in the classroom. 2 independent variables. So the first one is simple, the share of students with migration background. Then we obviously take into account the differences between a native 2nd generation and 1st generation. We have a proportion from 0 to 1. Finally, we have the social linguistic diversity that is based on an item asked by INVALSI regarding the language spoken at home. We can rely up to 16 languages categories. We create variation index. So what we show is the Shannon equitability index, that is simply an index of concentration that give more evidence to the little share of information. In this case, maybe few share of some languages spoken in the classroom. The control variables are at individual level: sex, ethnic status, language, enrollment, and socioeconomic index. And we replicate this control at classroom level with addition of class size. We run OLS estimators. We adopt a weighted scheme because when we run the sorting test, some of the schools don't pass the test, so there isn't a random sorting. And we recalibrate our estimate, taking into account this thing. And then we account for the non-independence of the students in the same school with cluster standard error at school level. We run several specifications to address our research question and hypothesis. So ethnic share, ethnic diversity alone and then jointly in the model, ethnic share interacted by ethnic diversity, and asymmetric effect of ethnic share and ethnic diversity. This is the first, I think, important hint to share with you. That is that the fact that diversity index and ethnic share are not the same thing. So there is a correlation about 0.5. So we are going to measure two distinct concepts. These are the first result of the main effect. Just as a guideline, the black coefficient are the ethnic share effect alone without inclusion of diversity index. Degree 1 is the same thing for diversity index without ethnic share. And then the blue ones are the joint inclusion of the two non-native indicators in the same regression. So the key message of this slide is that we see a negative, a negative effect for literacy when we look at diversity, that is resistant also when we include ethnic share, minus 0.02. And the same thing works for misconduct for ethnic share. So higher is the ethnic share, higher is the misconduct behavior in classroom. The second slide is about the student migration background interacted with diversity. We split diversity in 3 categories: low, medium, and high. And so we don't find a very interesting pattern, except for the fact that in misconduct, when the diversity is low, that it means that the ethnic stocks belongs to the same language spoken at home, let's say, or the same country of origin, there is a higher chance of misconduct in classroom. This red circle. Then we evaluate the asymmetric effects of ethnic share by migration background. And what we see that this first pattern, so that natives show higher misconduct compared to the other, but the other categories, second generation, first generation, are not significant. And there is this second pattern regarding the first generation of non-natives. So show higher well-being and a negative effect both for literacy, both for numeracy. When we look at the symmetric effect by linguistic diversity, we observe this pattern, so that the first generation has the diversity increase, there is less chance of misconduct in the classroom. And for natives, there is a penalty in terms of literacy. So the empirical evidence so far suggests that the effect is present for some outcomes, mainly literacy and misconduct. There isn't present for friendship and at all. The effect is moderated by ethno-linguistic diversity only for low dose of diversity, in the case of misconduct. There are some patterns on asymmetric effect, but overall the effect size is teeny, in line with the previous literature if we refer to continui. This paves the question about if it's useful or not to redistribute these students across classroom. It seems not to be an effective strategy, but we have to also account for the fact that maybe if we look at recently work of Ballatore and others, that we are not able to disentangle at all the role of the principal in terms of class size. So what the principal can accommodate the ethnic stock in the classroom, expanding or reducing the class size. And so what we see is a sort of effect at gross of the principal decision. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation, and thanks for both of you, Emmanuele and Maurice. The floor is open for questions. Wow. Can you hear me? Yeah. So nobody's asking questions. I don't know. I mean, I found myself the study very interesting, and so, but I was hoping and thinking that it would have raised some questions from the people present. I don't know, Maurice, do you want to add something? So perhaps somebody will come and ask other questions.
What I have to add? I don't know. No, it's maybe there are too many results in one presentation. People weren't able to follow everything, but we thought that for this kind of analysis, just looking at the performance was not sufficient. And it's also important to have a broader view, to look at also other types of outcomes. Emmanuele didn't mention effect size. Maybe that would be also important, because sometimes you may find some significant effects, but we have also to take care of whether they are important or not. That's something that in the paper we do. We didn't specify that so much. I don't know if you have any.
Well, no, I mean, if I can, because I wanted to avoid to ask questions all the time, but it's very interesting. I've got a question about the policy implication. I mean, your results are kind of, in a way, very interesting and depressing. I mean, if redistribution across classroom does not be an effective strategy, what would you suggest?
Emmanuele, that was your comment.
No, it's so the suggestion at the moment that I think that if we take to the extreme the result of this research is that there isn't so much in those schools that do random sorting. So it seems that there is a good role of the principal in case. So if I cannot fully account for the role of the principal in this setting, so it means that the principal do a good job in stabilize and redistribute, so manipulate the class composition, class size. And so this is the main implication of this paper. So
maybe we can add also that if we want to find, let's say, a possible viable intervention on the side of the school principal, is if they can, they should try to avoid to put too many students from the same ethno-linguistic group in the same classroom, because we found that when there is this, that could be detrimental for misconduct, for instance, because basically what I think here is that together their forces, they reinforce each other and they misbehave. If you find people with foreign background but with heterogeneous background, it's less let's say, probable, it's likely that this mechanism, this process proceeds and surmount and becomes important. So maybe this one could be one possible intervention. And this is something that you didn't grasp with previous studies just focusing on performance. There is also misbehavior in classroom and students' well-being that are important and are also increasingly considered by the OECD as additional outcomes, especially when looking at children like 10 years or 11 years old.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions? Other questions? I saw Fabrizio before, but now I don't see him anymore. I don't know if the line dropped down.
No, Fabrizio wrote me that he had to leave because he has appointments at the UI. So he forgot about that. He wrote me in private.
No, because I had some problems of connection too, just for a few seconds, I thought. Okay, thanks a lot. We will have some time at the end of the session, so if other questions rise, we can ask them then. And so we move on to the second presentation, which is about private and public high schools in Italy. Angela Martini and Andrea Bendinelli. I don't know who's presenting.
Me, hello.
Okay, welcome.
Okay, my colleague Angela and me explain this contribution named Private and Public High School in Italy, INVALSI test result and management body of the school. So we checked that in Italy is one of the few countries where, on the basis of the PISA surveys, the private schools have worse performance than public schools. Generally speaking, private high school in Italy seems to have a remedial role, considering that their enrollment is composed by less talented students from relatively rich family backgrounds in comparison with students attending public schools. However, a recent study based on the waves 2009, 2012, and 2015 of PISA test scores seems to indicate the existence of heterogeneous performance in the private sector depending on the type, confessional or not confessional of the private school, of course. Okay. So the premise is that in private education in Italy, has always played a marginal role. We checked the ISTAT survey, so according to ISTAT data, in the year 2018, students in private school were about just 9% of the total number of public attending schools of every level, from kindergarten to high school. Studies based on PISA and INVALSI test on the effectiveness of private Italian schools compared to public schools show that in general, in private and in lower secondary education, private schools outperform public schools, while in the upper secondary education, the opposite happens. A recent study by Checchi e Verzillo, published in the 2017, based on the waves of PISA in the last three termed, indicate the existence of heterogeneous performance in the private sector of upper secondary education, depending on the type. How we say before, confessional or not confessional of the private school. Our works aims at this objective. The first one is the following, the suggestion of that study by Checchi e Verzillo to check the performance of public and private confessional and not confessional school, drawing from result of the last INVALSI assessment in 2019 of the 10th grade students. The second is to analyze the characteristics of the student attending public schools, private, confessional, not confessional school respectively. The last is to analyze how the difference in test result between private confessional, private not confessional public schools varies when controlling for student and school variables, particularly socioeconomic status and prior attendance in the last INVALSI test. We used about data and methods. We use population data, Italian and math test score on 10th grade students, with the available information in the INVALSI dataset about their background and prior attainment. The dataset is divided by type of school depending on the subject. So we did 4 kind of analysis. In Italian, the type of school is 4, classical and scientific lyceum is considered together. Other lyceums, technical and vocational. About the math, scientific lyceum and other lyceum with classic lyceum, technical and vocational schools. We used method comparative analysis and in the end multi-level regression analysis. Okay, this is the observed result in Italian language test. We can see that the overall average score by the student of the public schools in Italian are lower than the scores achieved by the student of the confessional private schools, but higher than the scores of the not confessional schools. If we looking at the result by type of school, each kind of school, so lyceum, etc., we can see that the student of public, scientific, and classical lyceum show an advantage of 7 points over the students of the private schools, private confessional schools. In the other lyceum and in technical school, public school, students have a score that does not differ from the corresponding private confessional school students, but is higher than that of private not confessional school students. Finally, about the vocational student school, public school students have a just lower score than the private of student schools, both confessional and not confessional private school. In about the math test, the result in mathematics are very similar to those already seen for Italian test. Just a few difference in other lyceum that just 3 points above of the private confessional than public school, but just a little bit. Okay, about the statistics, social demographic characteristic of pupils by type of school and management. We can see that boys are more numerous in private school than in public school, especially in private not confessional ones. We can see 70%, almost 70% in lyceum, then 50% in public school. About the origin of the students, in all type of private confessional school, foreign students are less numerous than in public school and in private not confessional schools, in all kind of schools. About the last column, we can see that the ASCS index in all type of private school is higher than in public school, especially in private confessional ones, in all kind of school. And about the cognitive characteristic of pupils by type of school and management, we can see that repeating pupils, about the repeating pupils, the percentage of repeating students is higher in private school than in public school, particularly in private not confessional schools. And about prior attainment in Italians, measured by INVALSI test score at the end of lower secondary education in 8th grade, generally is higher in public school than in private school, particularly than in private not confessional school, except for vocational education, where just similar with public school. Okay. From observer result to net result, what is the relation between the performance of public and private high school, confessional or not confessional, and their intake? To answer this question, we analyzed by regression, multi-level regression, how the difference in Italian and math test score between private confessional, private not confessional, and public schools varies when controlling for students and school variables, particularly ASCS index and prior attainment, measured by INVALSI test score at the end of the lower secondary schools. The variable into the model, just about outcome variable, we can see Italian math test rush score in the INVALSI test at the grade 10. About the independent variables at the level 1, student level, the gender, the regularly at path of school, origin of the students, ASCS index, and the previous math score, previous standardized score at 8th grade. About the second level, independent variable at the school level, the type of school, confessional private school or not confessional private school, and the aggregation of the variable at level 1, so percentage of females, percentage of repeating students, percentage of foreign students, a school average ASCS, and the school average previous standardized score at 8th grade. So we did each model for all kind of, or each kind of type of school. The first type of school is classical and scientific lyceum for Italian test, and the scientific lyceum for math test. So about this kind of school, if we see moving from observer result to net result, when we control for level 1 variables, we observe a reduction in the difference in performance between private confessional and private not confessional, then public school, of course. And then about the last model, that is the model with student and school variable. While the difference of not confessional private schools compared to public school remain highly significant and negative, the difference of confessional private school is reduced considerably and is not significant. About the model fit, intra-class correlation, we can see is more right for math test is 31%. The variance explained by the level 1 and level 2 characteristic is more high for scientific lyceum in the math test than scientific and classical lyceum in the Italian language test. About the other lyceum, moving from observer result to net result, if we see when we control for level 1 variables, we observe a reduction in the difference in performance between private not confessional and public schools. Afterward, if we put into the model the school variables, we can see that at last model, the difference of not confessional and confessional private schools compared to public schools become not significant in the 3 out of 4 coefficient, just as likely significant and negative by the not confessional private school than public in the Italian language test. This is model fit, just intra-class correlation is more right for math than Italian language test. And the between variance reduction is stronger in Italian respect math test. About technical schools. About the technical schools, moving from observer result to net result, when we controlling for students variables, we observe a reduction in the difference in performance between private not confessional and public schools. While in the confessional private schools, we observe a couple points above respect public schools in Italian test. After when we controlling for every variables at 1, 2 level, the difference of not confessional compared to public school becomes significant and positive, both in Italian and math test. Just as likely significant and negative by the not confessional private, just a positive in the not confessional private school. We can check plus 6.5 and plus 5.3, 5.8, and p-value less than 0.01. About the last kind of school is vocational. About vocational, moving from observer result to net result, when we control for level 1 variables, we observe a slightly reduction in the difference in performance between private confessional and not confessional, than public school, of course. In the last model, that is the model with students and school variables, the difference of not confessional compared to public schools became significant and positive, both in Italian math score, like in the observed result, but just a few points less. And just as likely significant and positive by the confessional private school than public in the Italian language test. About confessional school in math test, they lose the significant. Okay, in the conclusion, what about observed result? Distinguishing between confessional and not confessional private high school, the first one performed better than public schools overall and in technical and vocational education, and some point lower in academic education. limited to classical and scientific lyceum, while the not confessional private school confirmed their role of school aimed essentially at making up school years, as indicated by the high number of repeating students in their enrollment, with the exception of vocational education, where the result of private not confessional school are higher than those of public schools and similar to those of private confessional ones. About the net results, what's happened when the characteristic of students are under control at students and school level? We saw about in lyceum, in particular in academic and technical education, the performance of private confessional schools are not distinguished from corresponding public ones, while not confessional private schools reduce their distance from public schools in academic education and show a modest advance in technical education. In vocational education, net result of private school, both confessional and not confessional, are higher than those of public schools, like, however, the observed result. Generally speaking, when controlling for student background, a prior achievement, individually and contextually, the difference in performance between public and private schools tend to cancel out or reduce considerably. I like a very close relationship between the recruitment of schools and their result. General conclusion, the composition of school intake from the point of view of students' social demographic characteristics and prior attainment is an important, if not the most important, source of achievement variability between schools. Consider this: the allotment of heterogeneous students to the units of the school system, the schools and within them the classes, is a crucial issue of educational policy. Thank you for attention.
Thanks, Andrea and Angela. We got some time for questions. The presentation was slightly longer, but we have a bit of time for questions. I will ask a question, hoping others will join. I'm not sure, because I mean, I just looked at your presentation, but do you use the geographical variable at all? Have you checked for that? I mean, the patterns you find, are they common for all Italy? For instance, is there any chance that in northern Italy or in metropolitan areas, we might see a different pattern, more not a traditional Italian pattern, let's put it like that, of private school choice?
Thank you for your question. Yes, but we check Italian in overall region. Just we don't separate the analysis by the geographical area of the Italy. We check that the number of students attended private school in Italy is more high in the north of the country, and is less attending private school in the south of the country. So but we can check, of course, the difference in performance between type of school in the three in one of the three geographic region of the country.
Yeah, I think it would make your results, whatever it comes out, even more interesting. Because I mean, again, an hypothesis would be that perhaps in northern Italy we start to have private schools which play a different role from what they used to, as a different function as what they used to play in the past. If this is not the case, then it's even more interesting, because it means that practically a good private school market does not seem to appear. But it would make more innovative some of the results you have, or make them, yeah.
Yes, but we check that the private schools is, I told at the beginning of the presentation that is just 9% of the whole number of the students. So if we reduce, we divide the data set by type of school, so lyceum, technical, and vocational. If we reduce again by the geographical area of the country, we have very few numbers to check the analysis. And of course, I think the result is not significant, but we can check, of course, just to try the statistics just without model analysis.
Thanks. Angela, do you want to add something, or anybody else has questions? Very good. Okay, so if there are no other questions and so on, we can move to the third presentation from Caterina Pavese and Enrico Rocco Probolino. Do fiscal restraints harm test scores? Evidence from Italy.
Okay, yes, thanks for giving me the opportunity to present here. Can you see the slide, right? Everything's fine? Okay,
yes.
Thank you. So this is a joint work with Caterina Pavese. She's been presenting in a parallel session, so I'm going to present this paper. So basically, the motivation for this study is that we all know that education is considered as the main instrument in the hand of the government in order to obtain some goals like curbing inequality or promoting social mobility. But at the same time, in order to finance public education, we need to collect tax revenue and also take into account some public debt requirements. So this kind of tension between the revenue that you have to collect and the spending in education has been particularly important over the recent years with the explosion of public debt and the following adoption of austerity policies by several governments. So for instance, to give you some figures, Italy and Spain cut school spending by around 15%, according to OECD. And also, United States cut it by around 7% education spending in the years following the financial crisis. At the same time, also, many countries have adopted so-called fiscal rules, that are a set of fiscal rules that aim to prevent public debt accumulation and deficit accumulation. But despite the fact that many countries adopted this kind of fiscal rules, we don't know actually the effect on public spending allocation, or whether this affects any broader socioeconomic outcomes. So in this paper, we are going to study the effect of this cut in public spending on test scores of Italian students. And in general, this kind of question, this broad question about whether school spending affects students' performance, it's a long-standing question in economics and sociology literature, and can be summarized by two views. The first one, the classical view, by also sustained, argumented by many studies by Eric Hanushek. This view suggested that actually variation in school spending didn't have any strong impact on test scores, while a more recent literature that focused much more on the empirical strategy and also can use better data. This literature suggested that actually school spending is really important in order to it's a very strong determinant of student performance. So in this paper, we focus on Italy, and we are going to focus on the spending financed by municipalities in Italy. That it's of course just a part of the total spending, total public education spending in Italy. It's around 15%. But what is striking in our view is that first of all, there is a lot of heterogeneity across places. The general pattern here is that school spending per student is much higher in the north of Italy than in the south of Italy. A second interesting argument is also that spending is not very low. So the average school spending per student is around 700 euros in a municipality. But we all know that this kind of spending differences across areas are correlated with several other labor market and economic outcomes. You know that municipalities in the north are much richer, so they also finance, they have more money to spend in education. So what we are going to do is to find a source of exogenous variation. And this source of exogenous variation that we are going to spend is the eligibility for fiscal rules that target just municipalities above a discrete threshold. That is just municipality above 5,000 residents. What we found, basically, just to summarize briefly what we did and what we found, is that first we found that municipalities eligible for these fiscal rules spend on average around 100 euros less per pupil to finance primary schools. Then we use this source of school spending differences to see whether this variation has any effect on test scores of the students. And what we found is that this difference by around 100 euros per pupil produced a reduction in the test score in math by around 14%. And almost the same also when we look at reading. Also, we ran some heterogeneity analysis, and we found that most of the effects came from children from lower socioeconomic background and also from places with low baseline spending. In the final part of the analysis, we will provide some mechanism, and we will show that actually these fiscal rules, these fiscal restraints, and eligibility for fiscal restraints affect a lot of the availability of several basic instructional tools and investment in school facilities. So just let me briefly give you some information about the Italian schooling system. So basically, we know that compulsory education in Italy is organized in 2 cycles. In this paper, we are going to focus on the primary school, so from age 6 until age 11. And so basically in Italy, the lion's share of public spending is the central government spending that is responsible for paying teachers and also for defining subjects, instructional hours, and teaching programs. So our focus is on municipalities that spend around 700 euros per pupil, but they are responsible for a bunch of services for primary schools. So for instance, they are the main they invest in school buildings, in constructing and renovating school buildings. They also provide school meals, transportation. They finance laboratories, libraries, and gyms. And finally, also they have some material resources to finance, such as heating, internet, electricity, and cleaning costs. All these things, we discovered also that many of these things are really important just recently with the pandemic. For instance, how much it's important also to have class size that are good, and also school buildings that are innovative. And we just discovered that actually these things are really heterogeneous. Their quality is really heterogeneous across places. And these are all things that are financed by municipalities. And basically, what we are going to exploit is the fact that municipalities that are above a certain cutoff, specifically above 5,000 residents, are eligible for fiscal rules. Fiscal rules means that you cannot accumulate debt, you cannot accumulate deficits, and so on. So our idea is that this eligibility for fiscal rules will affect the amount of school spending that you are going to finance. And yes, so let me just briefly also talk about the data. So we are using INVALSI data, and we focused on the 2nd and 5th grade. for the universe of Italian students that enrolled in 2011 and 2012 in Italy. And also we collect teacher questionnaires where these questionnaires contain a lot of interesting questions about school and class equipment, the availability of educational tools, such as availability of computer at school, functioning Wi-Fi, tablets, interactive whiteboards, etc. For collecting information on school spending and resources, we use administrative data from balance sheets of Italian municipality, where we can observe every year in every municipality how much this municipality has invested in both current and capital spending. Also, we collect a lot of information from news on the infrastructure available at school and the nature of innovation at school. So let me now describe the empirical strategy we implement here. So basically, our strategy is a fuzzy regression discontinuity design. The intuition is that in a first stage, basically we regress the spending in a municipality. We are considering the total spending in school, to finance school in a given municipality over the last 15 years. And then we regress this measure of spending on a dummy for municipalities that are above 5,000 residents. That means that are eligible for fiscal use. So basically, we expect this coefficient here, alpha 1, to be highly significant, because it will suggest that actually municipalities that are eligible for fiscal use do actually spend less to finance schools. Then we use this source of exogenous variation in spending across municipalities as the main determinant of the scores of each student in a certain subject in a given municipality. In our baseline estimates, we focus on standardized test score gains. That means that we subtract the second grade from the 5th grade in our outcome. But we will show also regression separately for this outcome. So our coefficient of interest is beta 1, that is a local average arithmetic effect that measures the effect of school spending per pupil in a given municipality on standardized test score gains for a student in a given subject. And so we run a bunch of tests to show that this design is valid. So for instance, we are a bit concerned that actually fiscal rules that didn't affect exclusively school spending, but they can affect also other outcomes. But we show that actually, for instance, if we look at taxable income per capita or housing prices differences across this group of municipalities, they don't look bad, they look quite similar. If we run the same strategy on this outcome, we don't find any statistically significant effect. So let me now show you the results. So basically, in this figure, this is basically the first stage that I showed you before, the alpha 1 coefficient. So here we are showing how school spending per pupil changes as we move from municipalities that didn't have fiscal rules, this municipality on the left of the cutoff, to municipality eligible for fiscal rules, a municipality with a population size above 5,000 residents. And what you can see here is that there is a jump, and this jump is around 102 euros per pupil. That means basically that eligibility for fiscal rules does affect school spending per pupil. Then we are going to use this variation to show the ultimate effect on test score. So here in this graph, we show it's basically the same group of municipalities. On the left-hand side, you can see the test scores in math for 2nd grade, and in the bottom panel for reading. Then in the middle figures, you can see the effect on 5th grade. And then in your right-hand side figures, you can see the differential between the 5th and the 2nd grade. And what you can observe here, so there are basically two main messages here. So the first one is that when we observe the effect of fiscal rules eligibility on 2nd grade test scores, we don't find any significant effect. This is important because it implies that the baseline characteristics of the students were equally distributed around the cutoff. So the distribution is smooth, suggesting that there was no sorting of students around the cutoff, or that, for instance, background characteristics were different. And this is reassuring evidence. Then when we, the second point is that differences emerge at 5th grade. And basically they go in the direction that we expected. Basically, set score in municipalities that spend less, that are municipality eligible for fiscal rules, the score are slightly lower. So when we subtract then this variation from the 2nd grade variation, we found that on average, eligibility for fiscal rules reduces the standardized math score gains by 14%, and the reading differential by around 15%. So basically here is the result that I just showed you. And we also, we control for a bunch of characteristics like student level controls, or municipality level controls, or fixed aspects specifically for cohort or region, but the result seems to hold quite well. So we also ran a regression specifically on some samples. What we found is, for instance, that we don't find any statistically significant, any difference by gender or by nationality, but we found results that are slightly different when we look at heterogeneity between North and South municipalities. Usually effects are much larger in municipalities located in the south of Italy. This is true for math, not for language. We found also that the results are mostly concentrated among low background students, for students from a low background, and also municipality where the initial level of spending was pretty low. Yeah, so basically in the last part of the paper, we try to also shed light on the mechanisms behind these results. So we first look at different sources of spending, and we found that basically in a lot of different school spending categories, we found also some discontinuities, especially in goods and service provision financed by municipalities, but also in the staff, in the amount of spending for the school bus, in infrastructure, etc. Then we, using also the REACH questionnaire, filled out by teachers, we found also that there are differences in availability of computer, interactive whiteboard, and availability of cameras. So for instance, in municipalities, here the outcome is the lack of the variable that we are showing here. So for instance, the probability of not having a computer in class is around 26% higher in municipalities that are eligible for fiscal restraint. And also we found that using data from MURE on some characteristics of measure of innovation and other quality of infrastructure of municipality, we also found that there are some differences across these two groups of municipalities. So for instance, the probability of having automatic heating in a class is around 4% lower in municipalities that are eligible for fiscal rules. So let me conclude. So in this paper, the aim of this paper was to shed light on the effect on school spending on test score of Italian students. We take advantage of the availability of for fiscal rules that change discontinuously depending on the municipal population size. We found that basically municipalities that are eligible for fiscal rules spend on average around 100 euros less to finance school. We found that using longitudinal data on pupils' attainment in INVALSI tests at the beginning, at the end of primary school, we found that basically these differences in spending translate in a difference in standardized test score gains of around 12% of a standard deviation. Then in the last part of the analysis, we show that also there are several differences in instructional tools and limited investment in school facilities across these two groups of municipalities. So basically, as the bottom line of this study will be that fiscal restraints that were adopted by several countries in the aftermath of the financial crisis can create some kind of unintended consequences for younger generation, and also exacerbate inequalities across generation in cases when the government, in order to comply with fiscal rules, decided to cut education spending. So thank you very much. I look forward for any questions.
Enrico, thanks. Again, could you leave the last slide?
Yes. Sorry.
Are there questions? Gosh, if you are tired today and it's Friday, I guess what's going to happen at the conference tomorrow, but I don't dare.
So you asked for the last
yes.
slide, right?
Yeah,
yes.
well,
okay.
My question is, I was surprised by the size of this 12%. I mean, how you test what happens on pupils' attainments. I mean, of course. So I was trying to think about it. Of course, we are talking about, as you say, most of the money does not come from municipalities. Okay. I don't remember correctly, but I think that the per capita expenditure on students is above 8,000 euros or something like that. I don't recall if that is primary school or in general. So really talking about 700 and some euros, which is the estimation you have, is probably less than 10% of the overall expenditure. So I'm wondering, it's a dramatic effect.
Yes.
Or a reduction, which is of course strong, but it's not like saying we cut by a third the whole expenditure. So I was wondering if, I mean, I wouldn't have expected such a broad, oh, there is a message. I don't know if somebody wants to join us discussing. Oh yeah, Christina's got a question later on. So my question is, how can we explain such, I mean, and part of the municipal expenditure goes, as you said, into infrastructure. So I would have expected a refurbishing of buildings and so on. It goes into, yeah, meals. But again, that opens up the fact that, I mean, this is a very interesting first paper, but then I think you need to try to disentangle more how come expenditure not thought for core functions in the school, paying teachers, just to make it clear, has such a dramatic effect as you find. I don't know if it's kind of a waterfall effect on other things. You try to write something here, but I'm a bit surprised it's so strong.
Yeah, so can I reply now? Or should I first
sorry, yeah, usually we collect questions. Christina is asking if the source of the data on municipal expenditure or spending is OpenPolis, but I think you said is the data from, I don't know if you picked it there, but it was the municipal budgets data. But I mean, you know it better than I do.
Yes, I cannot hear you anymore. But yeah, I understood the question.
No, I just stopped. I was giving you the possibility to reply.
Okay, no, thank you. Yeah, no, about the data. So let me first answer to the second question about the data. Yes, this is open source. You need to scrap the data from the website. Otherwise, you can ask for the data to the Ministry of Interior that send us the data from 2001 until 2015 on municipal spending. So about the first question, that I think is a very interesting point about how to interpret this coefficient estimate, that is quite big. I agree. So there are 2 points I think to discuss. The first one, this is a local average treatment effect. That means that this coefficient, this very large effect, applies to these schools that on average they are very small schools. So consider that we are looking just at schools located in municipalities with a population size around 5,000 residents. This means that so first of all, the effect could be could depend on population size. So in this kind of schools, the marginal effect of an additional euro of spending will be much larger than the larger municipalities. Why this? For instance, one explanation could be economies of scale. So if you're a big municipality, you can exploit economies of scale, and so an additional euro doesn't have too much effect. In this case, when we are looking at small municipalities, even a small increase in spending, like in this case, around 100 euro more, can have larger effect. The second point that I want to emphasize is to put this result. So we also try to put this result in international perspective. This is important. So for Italy, I think we don't have a clear idea about the effect of school spending on test scores. We have an idea about other things like the effect of class size on test scores, or the effect of teacher on test scores. There are already some studies, but for school spending, we just have, I think, for the best of my knowledge, one of a couple of papers that didn't look at the same sample we are looking here. So an important thing also is that in other studies, mostly focused on the US, they found slightly lower effect. But when we look at the effect over the long run, especially on capital spending, that is what municipalities mostly do, about edilizia scolastica, for instance, this effect takes time to realize. So we are looking at effects that are over quite a long run. So fiscal rules were introduced in 1998, so more than 20 years ago. So our idea is that these fiscal rules create persistent difference in spending across these municipalities. And this is what we are capturing. We are capturing not just a short time effect that we expect that will be much lower, but we are capturing very long run effects. And so in this perspective, I think that the results could make sense. But yes, another thing that I like about your question was also that would be nice also to try to disentangle what is the effect from capital spending from other things like current spending and other things that maybe are not very important. Yeah, we see this as a starting point still to continue working in this area in Italy, because we think that we need to understand more about this effect. Yeah, so if there are other questions, I will be happy to reply. Yeah.
Very interesting. Thanks for the answers. Other questions? Okay, then thanks again for you, and thank also your colleague who's not here now. We move to the last presentation. Agostino Portera is presenting a paper on intercultural competences for confronting inequalities and discrimination at school. Agostino, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I try now with my screen. I hope it works. Okay. Yeah, but can you see the screen? Okay, good. So thank you very much. I hope you are not too tired now after so a long day and so many talks. As you said, the topic of my presentation is on intercultural competences for confronting inequalities and discrimination at school. So I am going to divide the presentation into three more parts. The first of all, starting with the data that we have on INVALSI and PISA. Secondly, the proposal to improve more education, and I will call that intercultural education in a multicultural society. And third, I will end with, so it will be the main topic of the presentation, to present models of intercultural competence, and in particular, a model that we develop in the Center of Intercultural Education at University of Verona, where I am teaching. So let's start with statistics. So that all over the world, many studies shows that school success is related to cultural and geographic differences. So in general, all over the world, as this is the statistic, and we have foreign students have shown higher failure rates and seem to struggle much more in the school than compared to local students. So you see by OECD PISA, so we have in Italy about 10% of students from an immigrant background, and 3 in 7 are social economical disadvantages and show low performance. This in Italian, so reading performance especially, but also in science and mathematics. And same data were collected from INVALSI. So what do we need? Of course, this is a very, very broad topic, but in our opinion and through our studies, we need an educational form which is based on intercultural concept. And I suppose many of you know already the intercultural education approach, but I am going to present very shortly to the people that perhaps are not so confident. So first of all, the changing that brought from intercultural education, I would summarize into main points. First of all, the view of identity. In the intercultural approach, identity are no more static. Instead, they are dynamic. Identity change all of the times. That means that they are very, very dangerous, I would say, or at least wrong categorization, what we assimilate identity with nationalities. So like Italian or American or Chinese, there are so many people, and identities change all the time. The second point is that migration and the life in pluralistic and multicultural society is not just a problem, as we use usually to talk, but could be also a great opportunity. In intercultural education, the theory said it depends on the approach on education that we develop and apply. It's not a problem to have a multiple identity or to live in multicultural society. So what does it mean, intercultural education then? So first of all, intercultural education is not a completely new approach, but it's based on the 2 previous approaches. It's based on the multicultural approach and also include forms of the transcultural approach. It means that in the intercultural approach is important the acquisition and knowledge and the respect of diversity, when this was the multicultural approach says, but it's also important to develop and to respect common elements like norms, rules, value. This is the transcultural approach. So the intercultural approach takes into consideration the best of the previous 2 approaches. On top of that, it adds something very new. So they're giving the theoretic background. First of all, the meeting. So it's not enough in education just to know and to respect. It is important to treat in contact. So a real encounter to start a dialogue about diversity and try to change. If somebody uses violence, I cannot respect in educational field, but I should try to change this form of thinking or the behavior. So in one word, intercultural is based on interaction, which means action in action. Everybody have to be key. So if you are interested, we published many years ago now with my colleague Carlo Grant, a book on this topic, so on the theoretical topic on multicultural, because in the USA, they use much more the concept of multicultural education. Secondly, it is not just a theoretical issue to work intercultural, but we need to operationalize. We need to work to develop some intercultural competences. We need intercultural competences in education, of course, in the school, and this conference is concerned on school, but I think also in other so-called educational instances like family, public space, civil society, mass media, and so on. since today there are so many models of intercultural competence, the concept is very old and we don't have the time today if you talk about the development in many countries. There's a different meaning of that and different approach. So Fantini counts about 2,000 different models today. And you can see some authors trying to divide those models. We in Verona started a study, and first of all, we did a critical review, literature analysis, and then it was a qualitative study with semi-structured interviews and with so-called privileged operators. And this is a practitioner with intercultural work experience. And then we also carry out some participant observation in many fields, not just at school. So, and the results you can find in these other books. And I am going now shortly to present the main results. First of all, the many of the approach, they are called themselves intercultural, but in the practice, they are multicultural. So cultural sometimes seen as static. So if you go to China, I tell you how to behavior with China, and the geographic borders and nationalities are used for defining cultural and identities. There's a high risk of stigmatization in many models. So they refer to stereotypes, to folklore, sometimes prejudging. And it is not enough considering the dynamic aspect of culture and the individuality of every human beings. We have many, many differences, not just related to nationality, like gender, social status, belief, religion, and so on. So in our research, we divided in the results, we divide the competence into three main parts, like the literature, the main, also in Europe literature, in knowledge, skills, and attitude. And I am not going to tell you all the results, but just to make some example about the knowledge of their own cultural, but also knowledge of the different cultural, and knowledge of verbal competence, so of communication. About the attitude, you see, this is just a summarize of sensibility, curiosity, ability of dialogue, and so on. And the skills, of course, there are many skills, linguistic and communicative skills, empathy, observation, and so on. So this is the model, if you're interested. And what we can see is that this dynamic model is not static. You see the spiral, and the spiral can go up, but could also go down. This is one of the characteristics that we will see. And the new is, you see here, they are of attitude, skills, and knowledge, but the attitude is broader. That's, in our opinion, intercultural competence are not so to divide from competence in general. So some theory of personality could give us could be from a great help. And we have two new areas. First of all, here, it is important that the situation where we act the competence, and is also important the relationship. We are not the same competent with all the people. We have sometimes also stereotypes and prejudices, not just sometimes, often, and not always we are aware of it. So the main characteristics, as you see, of this approach are that the competences are dynamic and interactive, so inconstantly flows, and then that each area includes both innate personality traits, so quality, but also acquired characteristics. So in our opinion, it's not so easy to make a difference between attitude and skills, they are very, very combined. And then that, as I said, that the intercultural competence depends not just from our competence, but also from the situation. They carry out some interviews, for example, with medical doctors, and they have 3 to 5 minutes to talk with patients, and sometimes also a school teacher that they have to follow the program and have lots of pressure. It's difficult to act in a competent way. Then the environment is very, very important. So how the hope. And then a problem is also the evaluation of competence, and we are not the first one, Fantini, but also Deodorf and others said it is very, very difficult and to measure the competence. Today we have many scales, but sometimes we risk to measure more the performance than the real competence. So, and I conclude because of the time. I think I have just a 15 minutes. So in my opinion, or in our opinion at Center for Intercultural Study, is diversity is a fact. It's not just an exception for just some immigrants' children, but we are more or less all immigrants, and we are all living in multicultural and multi-ethnic society. So in this case, there is an urgent need to develop intercultural, in our opinion, or at least to think about education. How should education cope? And with education, I mean, of course, schooling, but not just schooling in general, with all kinds of diversity. And we need the appropriate, what's in our opinion are the intercultural appropriate competences for promoting multiple identities and also social inclusion for everybody. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Agostino. I know everybody, I think, is slightly tired, but I would like to know if there are questions. Sorry, I'm going to check the chat. No other questions on it? Okay, so then thanks everybody for the session. Thanks for the presentations and the participation. And we'll see you tomorrow morning. Try to relax. Thanks again to everybody and have a nice evening.